The myth of learning styles and how we really learn. Learning styles is a pervasive belief in American culture. The theory suggests that there are individual and innate differences in how we learn. Learning style theorists have identified visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning as three primary categories of how students learn, and assert that learners learn best when teaching methods match learners' individual learning styles. Because of this, educators have spent countless hours adapting and tailoring instruction to perceived learning styles. However, cognitive science challenges the notion of learning styles altogether. As Danielle Willingham explains, learning requires a broad range of mental strategies. The best strategy for a task is the best strategy, irrespective of what you believe your learning style is. In this presentation, we will explore the fallacy and harms surrounding learning style theory and consider a few tried and tested learning techniques that do in fact support learning. It is important to distinguish the difference between learning styles and learning needs. A student that is only just learning English may need more visual representations than English-speaking peers. A blind student may require auditory instruction in the absence of appropriate Braille material. These and other specific needs due to extenuating circumstances do not indicate learning style differences. Rather, research suggests that these learners process and learn quite similarly to the rest of us, despite needing additional scaffolds or accommodations to access learning. The fallacy. There's really no good scientific evidence that learning styles actually exist. Rather, learning styles seem to be self-reported preferences. Extensive research has actually shown that learners do not learn any faster or any better just for adhering to their purported style. Many studies have been conducted to find out if learning styles really exist. A study at Indiana School of Medicine included hundreds of undergrads that took a popular learning style survey and then were encouraged to utilize the study practices that aligned with their identified learning style. Student performance was not correlated in any meaningful way with their dominant learning style or with any learning style that they scored high on. Researchers have also conducted other experiments in which study participants were asked to complete tasks according to their learning style. Again, there was no correlation between performance and matching preferred learning style with content delivery. Learning style theory can also come at a cost to learners. Learning theory allows for self-fulfilling prophecies. Believing that one's learning is limited to specific conditions provides excuses for failure or resignation. Learning theory also limits learners. Different mental strategies are best suited to particular learning tasks. Confining oneself to a specific learning style restricts the ability to diversify strategies appropriately. Finally, learning theory ignores the evidence. Effective universal learning strategies identified decades ago have been identified and supported by a broad range of scientific studies. Learning style theory neglects to recognize this large body of evidence. Instead of trying to adapt materials to imaginary learning styles, cognitive science has identified a number of methods that acknowledge research about how we learn to enhance knowledge acquisition, and these techniques have fairly universal benefit. Mentally, our creative experiences are more similar than different. Researchers continue to study how we learn and what learning strategies and techniques are most effective and universal, regardless of learning conditions, content material, student characteristics, and learning task. The techniques and strategies described and explained in the next several slides have been supported by extensive research that seems to defy what we thought we knew about learning. Distributed learning is a technique in which learning is broken up into smaller pieces. More commonly known as the spacing effect, it is especially helpful with new learning. Distributed learning allows time for the brain to absorb and think about learned material before adding on to it. It increases long-term retention and can as much as double the amounts that we remember later on. I tried this technique as I was reading about learning last Sunday. I intentionally stopped reading after each chapter and went off to do some mundane task, like washing the dishes or putting away my laundry. As I did these chores, I was keenly aware that my mind was deeply thinking about the chapter I just read. Throughout this week, as I was completing various aspects of the weekly assignments, I found myself very clearly remembering certain points that applied to my work. As someone who prides herself in being efficient, I have always just sat down and banged out my readings in one sitting. In hindsight, I have not retained much of that crammed information. I believe that spacing out my reading about learning led to a deeper understanding and a stronger retention of the material. Distributive practice is similar to distributive learning, and often the terms are used interchangeably. However, I believe there is a difference between initial learning, like when I was reading the 5 chapters about learning last Sunday, and practicing what we have already learned in order to score well on a test or complete a project. Distributive practice also promotes long-term retention. It results in stronger retrieval, probably due to a wider range of contextual clues that trigger such retrieval. Forgetting between practice sessions also reveals weaknesses that need focus. No stakes practice testing is another valuable learning technique. It includes practicing recall of target information or working through problems. Retrieval during practice testing reorganizes and strengthens later retrieval. It also slows down forgetting because it acts as retrieval practice. In addition, wrong answers reveal where to focus learning. Percolation is another valuable learning technique. It can be described as the downtime that follows a period of immersion in learning. Percolation is most applicable for long-term learning and tasks or challenging problems. It involves deliberate self-interruption. The brain instinctively prioritizes goals such as academic pursuits that are partially completed, which is what happens when we intentionally interrupt ourselves. These prioritized goals tune our unconscious perception to fulfilling them, resulting in those aha moments. For example, I have been working on this presentation throughout the week. In the past, I would have chunked out a large period of time to sit down and get it done in one sitting. However, I wanted to see how percolation affected this project, and it did. Each time I deliberately interrupted myself, I found myself thinking about next steps, adjustments that I should make to clarify points, and additions that needed to be included. I believe that had I sat down and completed the presentation all in one sitting, it may have been missing important details that only came to me when I stepped away from the project. While the learning techniques described in this presentation do not exhaust research related to learning, each is extensively supported by cognitive science and evidence. This is in stark contrast to learning style theory, which is unsupported by research. In closing, I have the following recommendations. First, we need to abandon learning style theory altogether. Tailoring instruction to perceived learning styles is time-consuming and has no proven benefit. Teachers' time would be better spent on more productive priorities. Instead, we should develop curriculum and lesson plans that distribute learning. Consider long-term projects or units that stretch across days or even weeks. Plan opportunities for distributive practice, including practice testing. And finally, allow and encourage time for percolation.